At first glance, this flower looks delicate and maybe difficult, but it's actually much simpler than you might think. Today, I am going to walk you through every step so you can paint this beautiful and unique watercolor flower right along with me. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. I'll just go ahead and pull out my watercolor supplies really quickly. We need some watercolor paints, a paper towel, some clean water, and some watercolor paper. Now, I do have an outline drawing on my watercolor paper already. Let me pull out a darker version so you can see it better and see what's going on. And then if you want to, you can draw this for yourself, or if you'd rather just jump right to the fun of painting, I will also have this available in my Etsy shop, and that way you can just print it out and trace it right onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house, and then you're all set to go. I will leave a link for my Etsy shop in the description of this video, along with links and information for any of the other products you see me using today. Now, one other step that is optional but might be a good idea for this particular painting today is to lighten up your pencil lines just a little bit. We are going to be using a transparent technique and keeping our colors extremely light today. So if you don't like pencil lines showing, you can pull out a kneaded eraser, roll it up into like a hot dog shape, and then roll it or even dab it across your pencil lines to take off some of that loose graphite, and that will lighten it up just a little bit. Then, of course, we do need some brushes to be able to paint our picture today. I will be using some of my personally designed Craftamo brushes today, and I think I will pull out the number 10 round, a number 3 round, and the number 1 rigger for this piece. And these brushes are back in stock, so if you're interested at looking into those further, I will leave a link for these in the description of this video as well. Now, I'm just going to quickly tape my paper down with some artist tape to help a little bit with the warping, and then I think we should be all set to go. All right, let's go ahead and get some paint colors ready on our tray that we will be using for the first step. I'm going to have some nice concentrated cadmium orange, and then I'm also going to pull out some alizarin crimson, again keeping it fairly concentrated. I'll also pull out some Gamboge, and that way we will have a nice, bright, warm array of color schemes to go right into that center of the flower. And at this point, I'm actually going to designate this larger number 10 paintbrush for these warmer colors, and you'll see why in just a minute. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to my number 3 round brush and quickly mix up the darker bluish gray color that's going to go around the outside edge of the petals. So for this color, I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and mix it with a little bit of Payne's gray that's already on my tray. And you know what? I might even throw in a little bit of Hooker's green into the mix as well. I'm just keeping this color more on the dark, cool, bluish green gray side so that it will really contrast with those bright colors in the center of the flower. And whenever I'm mixing colors, I always do like to test them out on a scrap piece of paper to see if they look good before I actually put them on my painting. All right, I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, we will be using the wet on wet technique a lot today. So to begin with, I'm going to take my number 10 round brush that I was mixing those warm oranges and reds with earlier, and then using some water, I'll paint an entire flower petal using just water first. Now you can see my water is still a little bit tainted, and I probably have a little bit of paint even in my bristles still, but that's actually exactly what I'm looking for. That way we can give our flower petals a tiny hint of a very light background color. Then after we have that water layer covering the entire petal, I'll switch over to the number 3 round brush and take some of the yellow or even the orange color and begin adding that into the very center part of the petal, maybe pulling it up a little ways around the edges just to help outline that petal shape, as well as some lines in the center of the petal as well for some faint vein lines. Now at this point, I'm going to designate this brush for these bright colors, and then while all this paint is still wet, I'm also going to pull out the number 1 rigger brush and designate that brush to the bluish gray color. I'll take some of that paint and begin applying it to the tips or outer edges of the flower petal, letting it bleed and blend into the petal just a little ways. When creating this transparent technique, it's really important to get some of the paint both on the wet area of the petal as well as a tiny bit in the dry space of the page as well. This way you can get a nice crisp outline on the very outer edge, and then where the paint touches the wet part of the petal, it's going to blend and blur and create a really nice, soft, neat, transparent look. Now, this can take a little bit of practice to get the hang of, but it is really so cool, and it's not too hard to do once as you've got it down. Plus, it's just super fun. In fact, I have several transparent flowers on my YouTube channel already that I go into a lot more detail onto how to make this transparent technique work. So I can put some links for those in the description of this video if you need a little bit of extra guidance with this. Okay, that's actually all there is to this. We'll go ahead and move on to another petal now, and you might notice that I'm going to skip some petals here and there that might be touching or overlapping just to allow for a little bit of drying time. But as I begin this next petal, I'm going to be painting it in pretty much the exact same way, starting with a really light wash of paint and water first as the base layer, and then using the number 3 round, I'll add in some of the oranges and yellows, and this time I'm going to try a tiny bit of red in there as well and see how that goes. You know, I actually really like that red color in there. In fact, I might even add a touch of red to the first petal as well before it starts to dry too much. Then when you're ready, and while all the paint is still wet, switch over to the rigger brush and begin adding in that dark bluish gray-green color around the outer edges, trying to make it crisp on the outside edge where it touches the dry paper, and then letting it blend into the flower where the base layer is still wet. The good news at this point is that we are actually going to be painting all of the petals in this exact same way. So once as you've got the technique down, this is going to be a cinch to whip out. I think that one of the most tricky things about painting this is that you really want to have some darker color around those outer edges of the petals, whether it's the orange that's closer down to the center of the flower or the bluish gray color around that outside edge. Just because this flower is going to be so light in value, we really need to have some dark color around those edges, otherwise the flower is going to disappear and blend into the background of the white paper. So just make sure you have some color around the edges to help it stand out better. But I'm really trying to keep this also very delicate and light in value and keep that transparent look going. So as far as the main larger portion of the petal goes, things are pretty simple and quiet. I think another key point to this painting is to kind of let the water and paint do the work for you. I'm really not trying too hard to force this into doing what I want. I'm kind of just letting that paint do its own thing and blend into the water where it wants to go, and then I'm just going with the flow of that. And if you ever feel like you need to add a little bit more color into the center areas of the flowers or anything, you can always add in more paint as long as the petal is still wet. Once as the petal starts to dry, then that paint is really not going to blend or bleed into the petals as easily anymore. So try to do that while everything is still wet. I do hope you're enjoying the tutorial so far. This is such a fun technique, and this particular flower and color scheme is extremely unique. I've been really excited to share this one with you. So if you're finding you are enjoying my painting and teaching style today, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on any of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. All right, we have 4 of these petals done on this flower. Now that they've had a few minutes to dry, I think we can come back in here and start painting in the second layer of petals, but you're definitely going to want to make sure these first petals are dry before you begin adding the second layer. Otherwise, they're just going to blend into each other, and that's going to take away from our transparent look, and you'll see why in just a minute. The good news is that we're going to be painting these in the exact same way as we've already been doing, so I'm just going to go ahead and continue on. Now that last petal really didn't overlap too much any of the other petals, but this next one is going to, and this is why we really need things to be dry before we start doing this, because with these overlapping petals, we're going to start adding in those darker outlined edges to overlap another petal, which creates that really transparent look. Kind of like you can see right through the petal and see the one underneath. So if the petal that you're planning to overlap is wet, then all these hard lines are going to just blend into each other rather than staying crisp and separate. I also think with some of these last few petals, I'm going to lay in a bit heavier on that red color into the center of the petal to really make it stand out and pop off the page. All right, very good. Doesn't this look so neat? We only have a couple of things that we need to do to this painting and we can call it done. But we again need everything to be dry before moving on. So this time I might actually pull out my hair dryer just to speed up that process a little bit. Okay, once as that's dry, let's go ahead and add in the stem of the flower next. We're still going to keep on with the same transparent look even with this. So I'm going to take maybe a little bit of sap green and blend that into our blue-gray color that we've been using for the outer edge of the petal, just to change things up a little bit. But then using the number 3 round brush, I'll go ahead and paint in the stem area with water, and it just has a tiny hint of green color in there. Not too much, it's very, very light and watered down. And then using the rigger brush, I'll take some darker paint color and add that into the very edges. Again, keeping it very crisp on the outer edge by letting it touch the dry paper and then letting it blend into the water area on the other side. Very good. Let's go ahead and move on to the stamen area of the flower next. Using the number 3 round brush, I'm going to take some of that blue, green, gray paint color that's on our tray and start painting in the lines for the stamen first. And I'm going to try to keep this fairly dark in value right now, just to create a really nice contrast between this part and the bright orange and yellow center of the flower. Okay, good enough. Let's go ahead and move on to the tops of these now. I'll start this out by using some Gamboge yellow paint and add in just dots of color right at the very top of these lines, making them look large and fluffy. And you know what? I think that actually might be a little bit darker than I like. So I'm going to take my paper towel and just dab at that a little bit and take some of that color off. Okay, I think I like that better, so I'll go ahead and continue on with these, but then after we get this yellow on there, I'm going to take a touch of either orange or red or both paint colors and also add some color dots to the bottom area of this to create a little bit of darker shadow space. And you know what? I think that's actually it for this painting. This really turned out so good. It's very different and very unique. I would actually say it's one of a kind. I think anybody you show this to would be pretty amazed and impressed by this one, so I really hope you give it a try. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had some fun and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.